Hello everyone, welcome back to our Spring Boot series. Today I'll be talking about the shutdown in Spring Boot. It's something that usually we don't talk in the meetings when we are developing an application, but it's really important from architecture point of view, because when we deploy modern applications, usually they are inside containers or in application servers, and we initialize a lot of cache and we create folders, initialization files and things like that. And sometimes we forget that we need time when the application should stop or should go shut down to clean all this stuff. And the Spring Boot allows us to configure all of these things, and that's what I want to talk about it. So I will show you at least 5 methods and everything that you should know about the shutdown and why and when you should apply it. In this video, usually I provide some theory, as you know, if you are following my videos, and then at the end I will provide some example. In this one, I will create more hybrid approach. I will show you an example in the slide, then I will show you in the code how to implement it, and then we'll execute it and see what happens. I think it's a simple concept. Everyone knows what is shutdown, so I don't think you have to wait to understand the theory behind the shutdown to implement the shutdown in the application. So let's start. So what is a graceful shutdown? It's a name that you can give in Spring Boot, meaning that you don't want to just stop the application. You want to stop the application, but if there are important things being run or being executed, they should stop gracefully. It means maybe they want to finish their work, maybe they want to close some resource, clean some resource, and things like that. So that's what we talk about, graceful shutdown. Of course, you can always stop abruptly the application, but if you can control it, I think it will be better. So method 1, built-in Web Server Graceful Shutdown. So one way to do it is you just go to your application properties or application YAML, and you activate the server shutdown equals graceful. And I will show you in the example. I think it's better than seeing on in the slide. So here in the application properties, you have this property, call it server shutdown, and you have the option to graceful. You have other ones, for instance, immediate. And immediate, it's what the name says. You just stop the application. It doesn't care if you have threads running and things like that. It just stops. It's like when you are executing, for instance, here on IntelliJ, and you just stop it and it just stops. If you were writing to a database, the transaction will fail and things like that. But now we are talking about graceful because that's the one we want to control. Immediate, it's already talked about. It just stops and that's it. But imagine that you want to control the process. So what you should do is just to server shutdown graceful. Then you have other options. You can define the time associated, or meaning how much time will Spring Boot wait to shut down, meaning to force the shutdown. Imagine that you say, okay, usually 10 seconds for me, it's enough. It's just to clean some files and should be enough. And there is an option, usually in the past, you had something like this, and I have on the slides enabled, but it's deprecated. Usually in the current versions of the Spring Boot, you should use access, and you have unrestricted, none, and read-only. Read-only doesn't allow you to do a post, which means that you can't do the shutdown, but you can check if it's shutdown. Unrestricted means, okay, you can force the shutdown, meaning that this allows you to use an actuator, and I will show in a moment the name of it, to be called using HTTP to start the shutdown. Meaning you don't have to click stop or do a Control-C or something like that. You can use a REST API to stop your application, and probably it will be the one that we want to use in your environment. But let's start simple, server shutdown, graceful, and here you can define the time. That's the first step. I will show you in a moment how to execute all of this. So default, it's immediate if you don't say nothing, but we are choosing, in our case, graceful. It's supported by Tomcat, Jetty, Reactor Nectar, and Undertow. And during shutdown, it stops first for accepting new requests if you are on the graceful, and waits for active requests to complete. Of course, there is that time that you can, by default is 30 seconds. You can change to say, okay, I will wait this time. Imagine that if it was not the case, imagine that something just hangs, so your application will never shut down. Okay, so this is what I show you. You can put 1 minute, 30 seconds, and that's the property that I show you before. So network layer rejects new requests as the first thing that happens. So the Tomcat or Jet or an application server, they say, okay, I don't accept any let's say a REST API call, and it just starts to respond with 503 and waits up for the configure timeout. The configure timeout, of course, it is the timeout per shutdown phase. I put 10 seconds in our example, but usually 30 seconds probably it's the most appropriate. But if you are connecting with a lot of different systems, maybe message queues and things like that, maybe you want more than 1 minute. It depends. You have to collect and understand how you should clean up your system before it shuts down to put the correct value on this property. Advantages: no code changes required, just pure configuration. And if you saw one of my previous videos, you can even configure this outside of your properties file. I mean, when you start your application in a container or using an environment variable, you can force the time from the outside. Use cases: web APIs, you just want to start to stop the request APIs. That's the first thing that happens. It just cuts the networking access and then does the shutdown. Second method is shutdown callbacks. All the beans, it's not a method to shut down, but it's something that you should be aware. Is every bean, as you know, in Spring Boot, if you are following my series, you have this annotation that you can put in a class that it's a bean in Spring Boot. And this method will be called during the shutdown. If it's graceful, of course. If it's not, it will not be called. There is no time for that. But if you are going with a graceful, this will be executed. So for all the beans, you have the opportunity to define methods that will be called when the shutdown is requested. So there are other ways. I created a previous video a long time ago, I think maybe 3 or 4 months ago, where I talk about the pre-destroy, disposable bin, and even other ways to use the pre-destroy. And I think I have an example here, like this component, resource bin, pre-destroy. You do the cleanup. The method doesn't have to be called cleanup. It just needs the annotation pre-destroy. If you want to use the interface, you can implement disposable bin. Of course, you have to override the destroy. And if you are using bins, not the components, but the bins inside the configuration file, you have to define here the name of the method inside the bin that should be called when the shutdown happens or when the bin is destroyed. Sometimes remember that the pre-destroy or any one of these methods is not called only at the shutdown, but for instance, when the scope or when the scope of the bin finish, means if you have a request scope, it's when you have the HTTP response, meaning that there is no reason for this bin to exist. So the pre-destroy will be called, or any of these methods that I'm talking about. So what are the advantages? Allows bin specific cleanup without affecting the entire app. That's the purpose of the pre-destroy. It's easy to implement with annotations or interfaces, and it's automatically integrated on the Spring's shutdown sequence, because when the Spring shuts down, it requests to all the bins say, okay, I'm shutting down. Maybe it's time for you to call your pre-destroy. Okay, use cases usually associated with resources, closing databases, some logging that you want to check, say, okay, I'm finishing, the application is shutting down, or this bin shutting down. Maybe you want to remove files, folders, probably something that you created on the post-construction methods or in the constructor methods of your bins. Method 3 is a graceful shutdown for asynchronous tasks. When you have asynchronous tasks, they are running in a different thread. So it's a little bit different than the usual stuff with a bin. So usually when you are using async tasks behind the scenes in Java, usually you are binding your execution to a thread pools, and there are a lot of them. To be fair, they are associated with executors, and then you have a lot of different thread pools that you can use. And in this case, you have to explicitly in your code to link your thread pool with the shutdown. And you can do it using this line, say, okay, set wait for tasks to complete on shutdown. You should say that you want to bind your asynchronous execution to the shutdown, and you have to, or you can explicitly say, okay, I may need 60 seconds or the time that you find more appropriate for your tasks to clean up my executions of the threads. That's an option that you can use, and this is the code. I didn't put on the example, but I let here the code that you should use if you are using the task executors on your application and you want to sync or bind to the shutdown process. So advantages: prevents abrupt termination of background tasks, because usually when you have background tasks, they are important somehow. That's why they are background. They are always running. Customizable wait time for task completion, and works alongside built-in Graceful Shutdown, which is great, but you have to define. You have to call, remember, these two methods here. Why it's important? Because most of the times, usually when I develop REST APIs, I usually have in most of them a kind of a cron behind the scenes and a sync task that checks for something. Sometimes it's analyzing cache, so other times is waiting for events and things like that, checking files, connecting to different places, and to help my REST API. Of course, it's not on all REST APIs, but it's common for me. I would say maybe 50% of my REST APIs usually they have asynchronous tasks running at the same time. And if I can link them to shutdown, it will be nice, because maybe I'm in the middle of something or starting something, and I just want to say, okay, the shutdown will happen now, so I will log, I will stop this task, I will have to abrupt this task, I cancel this task because someone requested a shutdown. And that it's quite important. In the future, maybe you don't understand why something didn't work, but you can check your logs, because the Graceful Shutdown help you to make better, let's say, observability on your application. Another method is custom Java Virtual Machine Shutdown hooks, meaning that you can associate methods to the Java Virtual Machine, which is quite strong. It's not only the Spring Boot application, but it's outside that, which means it's strong because even if you want to force somehow, you do let's say Control C, the Control C can start to or can break the application, but the Java Virtual Machine will handle the Control C and make sure that the things that you want to run will be executed before the shutdown. And I will show you how you can do that. You can define, for instance, a component like this one. And you can see here that I have a initialization bin. It's a way, it's not necessary to implement this interface. I just want to create this component. What matters is that here, when the bin is initialized, it could be a post construct here annotation. It's not necessary to use this implementation, but this is the code that I want to show you. So you have this runtime, get runtime, add shutdown hook, and then I put here a thread. And this thread can handle, let's say, make, if I will show you in a moment, I will click here, the stop, which simulates a kind of a Control C, and you will see that the application will not stop. It will wait for this execution, and I put here 3 seconds to make sure that we can simulate a real scenario. So it's a little bit more stronger than the others. The predestroy it's always called. The other ones are always called, but this one's it's not linked to the application per se, but it's linked to the runtime, to the shutdown hook, but it's linked to the Java Virtual Machine. Okay. So this is the example that I put it here, but of course the one it's more advanced, but you have the code here if you want to try yourself. And advantage executes even if Spring context close files. It's stronger than the bin. Even if the Spring Boot cannot handle the shutdown or wants to force it, the Java Virtual Machine will forbid and say, no, you have to wait for this. Unless you stop the Tomcat abruptly. In that case, there is no option. But if it's not the case, even if the Spring Boot starts to fail, this one can handle the execution. So runs in response to seek term and Control C. It's useful for non-Spring resource. General application is connecting to something outside that's not controlled by the Spring, and you want to make sure, say, okay, I really need 10 seconds. I know that you want me to shut down, but you have to wait these 10 seconds. And it will try as much as possible to wait, unless you force it somehow. Cleaning up temporary files, Graceful Shutdown in no web apps or scripts, fallback for unexpected terminations. When there is something that it's really difficult to handle gracefully in Java, maybe you want to use this method to control the shutdown. Another way is using Spring Boot Actuator to do the shutdown, meaning that it's not a different way to implement what to handle during shutdown, but to force a shutdown. And you can activate the Actuator shutdown, management endpoint shutdown enable true in properties. And in this case, what will happen, you allow an HTTP request to your application to start the shutdown. And probably this will be the popular one. Most of the times you have a web application and you want to remotely stop the application or provide a shutdown. Of course, really, really be careful about who can call this REST API, hide this API. Maybe one or two persons from the DevOps should have access to this API. Maybe it should be in a different endpoint, not on the same REST API, exposed in a different places. We're really well protected, because imagine that it's let's say a big e-commerce platform, and it's easy to someone just called Actuator shutdown. That will be really crazy for your website. The way to expose is this Actuator. It's like the others. We have to put here the shutdown. That's the name, and we have to enable. Currently, I put here enable because in previous versions it was enabled. Nowadays it's using access, and I can show you here on the application properties. Now we use access and not enable, and you put here unrestricted. And of course here I'm putting this with the star here, but you can just write shutdown if it's only one. I put the star because I want to access to all the actuators, usually when I'm providing these videos. But for the shutdown, you only need the shutdown, like I'm putting here. Okay. So advantages: allows programmatic or remote shutdown, because it's just a REST. You can do it with a curl, for instance. Security roles, for sure, just secure it. There is no exception, just secure it. Okay, unless you are in the development environment. Integrates with graceful mechanism for controlled exit. Use cases: admin tools. You just have a button and you want to click to say, okay, just shut down. Maybe you want to provide again some authentication here. In cloud environments, if you are using Kubernetes and things like that, it's very difficult for you to reach the application using a remote access. So you need an API to do most of the things to manage your application. As a bonus, I put, if you are using Kubernetes has an option called press stop. It's a kind of a configuration like we have for shutdown. Maybe you want to align this time with the shutdown of your application, at least for this pod in Kubernetes. Okay, so conclusion: built-in for web servers, easy config. That's the idea of this shutdown configuration. You have callbacks, as we saw. You are allowed to choose which code should be executed when someone requests a shutdown on your application. You can even handle asynchronous tasks. You have hooks associated with your application beans and Java virtual machine. And you have the Actuator that you can activate or not. Remember that you can provide at least two ways to perform the shutdown. One by REST API using the Actuator, and the other one is just do a Control-C, or you use a kill, for instance, in an operating system, or other programmatic way. That's the common two ways to do it. So let's see now in action our shutdown mechanism implemented. So first, we have the Actuator here activated, because we have the star here. So I'm allowing all the actuators. I'm saying here that it's unrestricted, meaning that we can call the shutdown Actuator. Here, I'm putting a maximum of 10 seconds to wait for all the operations related with the shutdown. And of course, I have to provide this graceful here to say, okay, please wait at least these 10 seconds before really stop the application. And I added here the pre-destroy here to, so we can see the bean being destroyed on the shutdown, and we see the output destroying categories REST controller. And I implemented, as I said previously, a shutdown hook associated with Java virtual machine, and we'll see that this one will also be displayed, but you'll wait 3 seconds before the application finish, and we'll see that the shutdown will wait these 3 seconds before really stopping the application. So let's start the application and see all of this working. So I will show you two ways to stop the application. One is just abruptly. You can click here the stop or stop here, and if I stop here, you can see I could see this one because there was time for the Spring Boot to close. So the IntelliJ said to Tomcat, hey, I will finish this and I will just stop it. and it just stopped it. So there was still time to execute this pre-destroy, but this one could not be executed because IntelliJ just stopped the Java virtual machine. It was a question of time, not a question of waiting. Okay, so now maybe there is some deep understanding of this. I don't want to go much deep. One of the reasons probably you see this, it's not that there are a special mechanism for beans, is that the beans are objects in memory. And before the application stops, probably the garbage collector start to work, and this method was called, and that's why you are seeing this output. It's not the shutdown mechanism that is associated or binded with the pre-destroy. It's just a kind of a consequence of how Java works, and the beans are objects. Let's see now using the REST API. So I'll start this again. Let's clean, and now I'm calling this Actuator. And we expect to be a nice graceful shutdown. And you can see again the bean was destroyed, not because of the garbage collector, it's because Spring Boot started to destroy all the beans. And this one, the shutdown hook, was also called, and it took 3 seconds to execute here between you see this and this, because you have this thread slip here, and the shutdown waited for it. So it was in this case graceful. This is what I wanted to show you about the shutdown, because it's something that we don't think about when we start the application, but it's quite important to understand how much time it takes for the application to graceful shutdown, and for us to make sure that everything will be cleaned and there will be no let's say noise or trash in the folders and systems, things like that. We can graceful clean everything before leaving the scene, as you can say. So thank you for watching this video. I hope it was useful for you. I'm not developing as many videos as before because I was really busy, and at the same time there was the flu that took me a few days to recover. So, but probably during the next days I will start to provide more videos as I was usually do it. Again, thank you for watching my channel, my videos. Please share it, subscribe, share with your friends, provide comments. It's always a motivation for me when I see comments and subscribers, because it makes me gives me motivation to create more videos. So thank you again, and I hope to see you in my next video.